This video is sponsored by Skillshare.
Hello Hambini fans and welcome to another episode of that satirical smirk fest that is the sarcasm-filled Hambini Engineering channel. Anyway, today I'm doing a video about balancing of wheels. So a lot of people from my last video asked if I could do a video on how to balance wheels and whether they need balancing or not. So that's what we're going to go through today. So first of all, I'll explain the difference between a static balance and a dynamic balance, and then some practical examples, and finally some PowerPoint and an engineer's best friend, which is called the back of a cigarette packet, also known as Microsoft Excel. First of all, let me explain what a static imbalance is. So objects that are slender, so that means they're not very deep, but have quite a big diameter, are referred to as slender objects, and you would do a single plane balance on them. So that basically means we're just going to apply one weight to balance it.
This is a good example of something that is dynamically balanced. So it's been balanced in two planes. So this is a car wheel, the back wheel of an Audi car. The wheel is 19 inches diameter and 235 millimeters is the tyre size going in. You can see it's been balanced in two planes. So we've got the outer wheel weight there, the outboard wheel weight, and there's also the inner wheel weight, which is, just trying to get it there, just there. Yeah, so it's been balanced in two. So this is a Winspace 65 wheel. The reason I picked this is not because it's a bad wheel or anything else. It's because the imbalance that you get in wheels tends to get worse as you get a deeper wheel. Now the Winspace, I would say, is one of the better ones. The Fast Sports also is a good one. The KPS wheel I've had was rubbish, really poor. In comparison, I suppose it's still acceptable, but this is probably one of the better ones. Now this, if you look, the valve hole, I don't know if you can make it out, is here. So it's not quite at the 6 o'clock position, it's slightly off. But that's fairly common. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to spin it up and we're going to go through some critical speeds, which is when the whole thing vibrates, natural frequency and resonant frequency, which in this case are the same thing. I've left the bike deliberately loose because in reality this vibration causes the bike to move left to right as you're looking and up and down. So by leaving it fairly loose, I'm hoping you'll be able to see that more, but as we spin it up, you'll see this go out of balance. So it's alright at the moment. So that is quite a lot of vibration, moving up and down. Now it's starting to come out of its resonant range and it's really quieting down a lot. Now it's vibrating a little again, but not so much you can see, and now you wouldn't be able to tell at all. So I'm going to try a basic static plane balance on this. Now the way to do this is to find the high spot, or the weighty spot of the wheel. I demonstrated before, it was like when the valve hole was down here. So basically the wheel shouldn't move. So it's actually starting to go there. So we've got a fairly good, the ratchet is not really in our favour, but it's about there. So probably we need to put a weight that's opposite here. So around about here somewhere. Now here's one I made earlier. It's a carefully calibrated M8 by 25mm set screw, and we're going to put that up there with some tape and then repeat the experiment. Ah, so high tech on this show. Fuck. What I've done is, first of all, I put goggles on, safety first and all that stuff. I put the weight on and now you can see the wheel just stays in place. It doesn't really come to the high spot or anything, it just stays wherever it's put. And that is a fairly good sign, fairly good indicator, and it's a fairly standard practice. If you look on YouTube, loads of people do that. Now, when we spin the wheel up, we shouldn't really get much or any in the way of vibration. So let's give it. Not vibrating at all now. So that wheel might not, it's not perfectly balanced, but it'll do. So now we've come down to a slower speed, and it still remains balanced. It is that time of the show again. It is time for PowerPoint. So let's start off with the PowerPoint. Should we see if the pen's working first, or shall we see if the title will come first? Let's do the title first. Wheel balancing for idiots by an idiot. We'll see. By Hambini, aged 5. Is the pen working? The pen is working. Has been working very well for a number of days. Right, Hambini.com, youtube.com/Hambini. You're probably watching there. And remember Patreon and the website. And I'm also on Instagram and Facebook. Right, I'll rattle on through this. What is the difference? I've already described basically what the basic difference is, but diagrammatically, a single plane balance is used for a slender body, a static balance. So slender means that dimension there is much bigger than that dimension there. You can see on this side over here, so we've got quite a fat object basically. It's not very slender. It's long in the axial direction and quite stubby in the radial direction. The key difference is in the weight. So this little orange thing represents the weight or the heavy spot. And on a single plane balance, you only put one of those to correct. On a multi-plane balance, you typically have two. Now some places, balancing gets more complicated, but you can have more than two. For the purposes of this presentation, it's all going to be about that. Right, imbalance. The primary cause of imbalance is usually the valve hole. It becomes the heavy spot when it's built up because the valve is made of metal and typically your carbon wheels aren't. And there's also obviously a bit that sticks out further. The cause of imbalance is typically a stack up of tolerances. So the length of the valve makes a difference. The tyres themselves have a bit of manufacturing deviation in them, so you might have a heavy spot in there. Inner tube and the sealant. So the inner tube immediately adjacent to the where the valve goes in tends to be reinforced, so that bit of the inner tube is thicker. Some of the things that can happen because of this are you can get speed wobble, which is an undesirable effect, and road buzz. So vibration through the handlebars. It is measured in gram millimeters, so that is a mass times a length. That is important. Right, the mechanics of what is going on. So let me show you an Excel model. So this is Excel, and from here the blue line represents the wheel and the orange line represents the heavy spot. So think of that as the valve hole. When you press the go button, what you'll see is the wheel kind of rotating round and round and round. The key thing to note here is something called the phase lag. So if I slow this down a bit, what's happening is as the weight goes round, the point at which maximum deflection takes place is at 90 degrees to where the weight is. So if you look here, the weight over here, almost at 90 degrees or almost horizontal, but the wheel has deflected the most at the top. So there's a 90-degree lag. I'll illustrate that in a bit more detail in a second, but you can see the sort of random orbit. It's like an orbit going round. Not ideal, but there we go. So that's what's happening there. So what I'm going to do now is repeat the experiment, but this time I'm going to constrain it so you only see the up and down movement, and this time it'll be a lot more obvious, I hope. So this represents the eye, and there's up and down, and there's the weight, and there's it going round. So let's show that in Excel. So this time it'll only go up and down if we just change this. Right, so it's going up and down now, and if you watch the orange line, where it reaches a maximum, the wheel deflection, is when that orange line is in one of the horizontal positions. So you can obviously be horizontal over there or horizontal over there. And that's what's happening in your wheel. As the valve goes round, it's only reaching a maximum amount of deflection at the horizontal positions. Now, the reason why that is important is because the frame, and specifically the fork, has different stiffness in the vertical direction and in the horizontal direction. It will also be a bit more important when I show you the the issues with phase lag. If you are one of the regular viewers of the channel, you will know about the extensive use of numerical modelling that I do on here. Now that would not be possible without Skillshare, who are kindly sponsoring today's video. Now, Skillshare is just a bit more than a learning platform. It allows you to interact, grow and succeed in tasks that you may have otherwise found somewhat challenging. In my case, I joined Skillshare for two primary reasons. The first was to improve my German, and the second, which is a lot more relevant and you've just seen, was to improve my Excel visualization skills. So it appeals to a wider range of people, such as those viewing the channel. Now, the course that I would recommend is this one, which is called Microsoft Excel Essentials Level 3 VBA Programming by Alan Jarvis. Now, I found this course to be quite engaging and pitched at just the right level. He covers everything like visualization strategies for wider audiences, some of the key coding, and also fine levels of customization that give you the tools to adapt what you've learned to your particular situation. Now, if you are interested in becoming a member, the first 1,000 people to use the link below in the description will get a month free trial of Skillshare. So what's going on here is I've drawn a graph to show you the position of the heavy spot of the wheel and the relative wheel position. So if you take the these sort of diagrams here, the orange line, orange mark represents the heavy spot of the wheel. So here it's over at the left, here it's at the top, the right and at the bottom. So the wheel is rotating that way. So it starts off here and then goes up to the top position, 12 o'clock position. At that point, the wheel deflection is 0. As it carries on further round, so the wheel is now at 90 degrees or horizontal or 180 degrees, depending on how you want to look at it, the wheel reaches maximum peak deflection and then it starts to wander down. So now the weight is pointing at the bottom and we are back to the middle, and that is what's happening. It's going along, repeating itself. So the phase lag, in words, means that maximum deflection occurs when the valve is horizontal. So how do you cancel it out? Well, the old way, clear way, is to go and put a weight that's exactly the same on the other side of your heavy point. So if you look at the blue line, this represents this here, and that is at a certain point versus angle. The grey box and this grey line, which are basically in anti-phase. So if you pick that point there, that's at a low point, that point there is at a high point. Again, if you pick this point here, it's at a low point, this point here is at a high point. So in theory, if you lay them on top of each other, they cancel each other out. And that is what you're trying to get to reduce the vibration. Now, in practice, it's not perfect. The reason it's not perfect is because that orange out of balance is modelled so it's on the very outside of the tyre. And you can't do that because you won't be able to ride your bike. So invariably what you'll do is you'll probably stick some weights that are slightly higher than the out of balance weight, let's say, on the inside of the rim. And because nobody's perfect, unless you're me, you'll get the angle slightly wrong. So ideally that wants to be here, which is opposite, but we've got a slight angle difference, which we'll call theta, doesn't matter for this case. So that's, you know, the practical of where you're going to get to. Now, if you do that, so the orange line is what you had when you started off, and the blue line is when you put an imperfect correction on it. And you can see it's made it a lot better, but it does, you know, influence the, I guess, some of the ride characteristics of the bike, and they will be influenced because of this increased mass and object there. Now, one way you can do it is to put the weight actually in the spoke holes, and I've seen that happen before. So it's not perfect, but it's a lot better. Now, what is the power loss? Well, the power loss is typically the area under the curve. Now, you're probably thinking, well, I've got a positive there and a minus there, they'll cancel each other out. So what we do is we square it and then divide by the time. So when you square it, all those values become absolute. If you add them up, on a bad day, you can have 12 watts, but there you go. The blue line, the area under the curve, is a lot smaller. It's a fraction of the difference. So you will definitely save some watts if you go and get your wheels balanced. Now, the residual imbalance this is just a chart with 3 wheels on it. So I've got the KPS front, Fastsports front, and the Windspace front. So if you haven't got anything else on it, it's just a raw wheel. This came from a balancing machine. So the angle is pretty self-explanatory. 0 is the valve hole. And you quite clearly see the KPS has a much more residual imbalance than the Windspace and the Fastsports. The Fastsports wheels are very good. They've historically been very good. The Windspace ones, again, are pretty good. Not quite as good as the Fastsports, but certainly perfectly acceptable. Right, some little tidbits. The natural resonant frequencies, the components and assemblies, will vary. I'm not going to cover them here. I'll probably put them on hambini.com. And you need a Campbell diagram to explain that, and that's too much for here. Now, what is an acceptable amount of imbalance? So if you read ISO 21940 section 11, it talks about rotor imbalances, and in there you have something called balance grade. So if I get rid of this, these are balance grades. So the balance grade that you can use for, I've used car wheels, is G40. That G40 means how much magnitude vibration is permissible. So 40 millimeters per second is something that you can accept. I mean, I think 40 might be a bit high. I'll probably be more inclined to go for actually 6.3. 6.3 you could do on a bicycle wheel. Going much lower than that, 2.5, 1 and 0.4, I mean, you've had it. 0.4 is what a hard drive is balanced to. We go back. Right, so I picked G40, and if you use G40, the formula looks like that. So your acceptable imbalance is 9549 times G, which in this case is 40. The wheel mass, RPM, is the rotational speed. So if you plug the numbers in, there's your 9549, which is a constant. 40 is the G rating, 0.8, so I've used 800 grams for the wheel, and 300 RPM, which is 37.8 kilometers per hour. It just happens to be a reasonable number. It's approximate values, but if you do that, you get an acceptable imbalance of around 1019 gram millimeters. Now, if you divide that by the radial arm, you get about 4 to 5 grams of imbalance that is permissible. So there you go. Right, now, do you need to balance? Well, I would say if you're going faster than 38 kilometers per hour average speed, yes. If your bike is, you know, predisposed to speed wobbles, again, I would do it. And the road buzz, I mean, people talk about compliance. Half of the thing you get through your handlebars is caused by imbalance from the road wheels. So it's an easy thing to get rid of. And imbalance is affected, or the feeling of vibration is affected quite a lot by weight. So if your rider weight is less than 65 kilos, I'll say get your wheels balanced whatever speed you're traveling at. The ISO is 21940 section 11. Now there are some negatives to this. So if you put the weight on the outside, there is an aerodynamic impact, and it's not insignificant. So a lot of pros put the counterweights actually into the spoke holes. That's quite a common thing. And then finally, you get a slight increase in overall rotating mass. Right, questions and comments. There'll be a bit more info on hambini.com. Remember to like and subscribe, and also check me out on Patreon, and please comment below. Would really appreciate your comments. Thanks very much, and as always, keep banging your hairdresser.